In September 2010, my boyfriend Dave, his best friend Tony, my best friend Liz, and I were all returning to our hometown for our final year of college after spending the summer in London. We had a fantastic time staying in my uncle's apartment, partying, and exploring such a big city. It was great. We stopped at a B&B one night about halfway home and were planning to get home around 6 p.m. We all woke up early, around 4 or 5, ready to set off again when we discovered that someone had obviously driven too close to our car and broke the right wing mirror off. Since this was a birthday present from my dad and I'd had it for barely 2 months, I was absolutely furious. We asked the landlady where we could possibly find spares or something to use in the meantime. She said she'd driven past a makeshift scrapyard or something a while back. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but she drew us a rough map and we got back on the road. I wasn't very sure she was right about her directions, because the closer we got to the area she'd circled, the more desolate the surroundings were. The roads got rougher and had changed from stone to dirt. There were no more farms around, just long weedy grass and patches of forest. It had basically become a moor. We were about to leave because of the wild animals, and I'd just have to get over being a paranoid driver and manage without my wing mirror when my boyfriend pointed out in front a handwritten sign directing us 2 miles down the road to a cafe and car spares. We drove down into a little cove surrounded by a forest, and we all got out except for my friend Liz, who was asleep in the back seat. There was a tiny cream hut with cafe spray painted on the roof, a caravan, and a hill of metal and bits of cars. As expected, we were the only visitors parked in front. The sun was up, but there were no lights or people around. I guess they were still sleeping since it was about 6 a.m. We walked up to the scrap pile, and I rummaged through it, looking for a wing mirror or any sort of mirror that could do for the time being until I could get it repaired. Tony picked up what could only be a decade-old mirror and suggested we just take it and go. But I, being sincere and stubborn, insisted that we must pay for it. I knocked on the door and waited. A big, hard-faced man answered the door and at first looked pissed off and tired, then smiled at me with 2 missing teeth. He leered at me for a few seconds, then, seeing the boys approach, asked us what we wanted. Tony handed him the mirror and asked how much it was. He said nothing, just to get to know us, to which I thought, fair enough. 2 more men then left through the patio door on the other side. They turned and smiled, both skinheads with teeth like meth addicts, and came over. They stank. He gave them the mirror and told them to go attach it to our car. He then introduced himself as Ian, sat us down on the patio chairs and offered us some sandwiches. I politely declined, but he insisted we must be hungry and told me to come in, saying that women are best at making sandwiches. I declined again, finding him a bit sexist at this point, and when he asked again, Dave, more sternly, reinforced that I said I didn't want to come in. Ian muttered something and then came and sat on the chairs with us. It became awkward very quickly as he started asking questions. It started off innocently, like asking how old we were and where we were from. Then it became a little uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which Dave answered, and then started asking us both private, explicit questions about our relationship. We sat in silence until we heard Liz scream. When we turned around, I saw one of the men who was supposed to be fixing the mirror with his hand in the back window, grasping Liz's leg. The other was looking around nervously behind the car. We got up immediately and sprinted off the patio, with Tony running after the guys, but they both headed into the forest. Liz was hysterical. She'd woken up to find herself on her own in the car with a man's hand running up her leg. I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have felt. I got into the back seat with her and consoled her while Dave came around the other side to get in. He told us some nails were on the floor. We looked over and there were about 12 of them arranged around the tire like the guy was ready to pop them. I couldn't really think why at the time, but now I wonder where they got all those car parts. We decided it was enough, and we didn't want to spend any more time there, mirror or no mirror. We were ready to go when Tony was the last to get in the car. He closed the backseat door, and as we looked back, we saw Ian reemerge from the house with something long in his hands, running toward us. My vision adjusted when he got a bit closer, and I realized he was holding a rifle, a hunting rifle. At that point, I actually burst into tears and hit the engine, slamming on the accelerator as hard as possible. The car started to go, and we got up to about 90, forgetting the dirt roads and just driving over whatever until that scrapyard was out of sight. We didn't stop looking behind us until we were safely on the motorway, heading home. To this day, whenever I go to London, I take a train instead, still terrified I'll meet them again. When I was in my early 20s, I had a friend with a psychotic alcoholic father. She didn't live with him, he lived in a remote little coastal town. Now and then, we would go together to visit him and stay the night. My relationship with him was creepy in itself, but that isn't the subject now. One night when we were visiting, my friend and her dad had a drunken blow-up and he kicked us out of the house. It was about midnight. We had gotten a lift down and didn't have a car. My friend's dad lived about 4 kilometers out of town, a cluster of 2 or 3 shops, accessed via a dirt road. We started walking down the dirt road to the town, where there was a telephone booth. This was in the days before mobile phones were commonplace. I was going to call my folks, who lived about an hour and a half away, to see if they could come and get us. The whole way to town, my friend was drunkenly moaning and crying about her broken relationship with her father, and she hadn't let up by the time we got to the phone booth. She sat on a bench next to the phone while I woke my parents up. They agreed to come and get us, and I sat down on the bench for the long wait. Shortly after this, a van appeared and parked just behind the bench we were sitting on, perhaps 5 meters away. There were 2 young men in the front seats, and they were looking at us. If that didn't make me nervous enough, the van door slid open, and I saw there were a number of young guys in the back. I don't remember how many, but there were more than 2. The place we were sitting was deserted with no houses nearby, just more road. There were no people around, nowhere to run, and no one driving by. It was a remote, desolate town. I stood up so I could see them better and kept my eyes fixed on the van full of men, acutely aware of our vulnerability. They were looking back at us and talking among themselves, quietly at first. Then they started talking more and more loudly. It became evident that they were deliberately talking loudly enough for us to hear. They were discussing pulling us into the van and taking us somewhere to harm us. I can't remember the exact words, but that was the gist of it. My whole body wasn't just shaking, it was quaking with terror. I couldn't take my eyes off the men. I remember the face of one of them so clearly. I could draw it now. He was sitting in the door of the van, looking at me with no expression, looking at me with dead eyes, looking at me like I was a thing. All this time, my drunk friend hadn't stopped sobbing to herself. Whether she knew the van was there at all, I couldn't say. I knew I had to tell her about the danger, but I was so full of terror that I couldn't move or speak. That was when the most incredible thing happened. My friend's father, who has never apologized to anyone in his life and is the most stubborn person alive, appeared drunk in his car. It's hard to describe how unlikely it was for him to do this. He could hold a grudge like no one you've ever met. He was such a stubborn person. He and my friend had an emotional reunion. The whole time my eyes were fixed on the van. The men had stopped talking and were just watching us. "Let's go," I said. We got back in the car and started heading for my friend's dad's house. The van started up and began to follow us. I tried to explain to my friend's dad about the men, but he said, "I'll just slow down and they can pass." They slowed to a crawl behind us. Then they started shouting out of the windows, screaming threats. They followed us all the way down that dirt road, and then all the way down the driveway of my friend's dad's house. They just sat in the van behind us, and we sat in the car, waiting to see what would happen. All of my friend's dad's neighbors had holiday homes, and nobody was there that night. We knew that if the group of men decided to get out of the van and carry out their threats, we would get no help. After a very long time, the van backed out of the driveway and left. My parents came in a panic to the house when they couldn't find us at the shops. My friend's dad hid in shame, and I went back to my family's house. I've been asked if I went to the police, but I can't remember. I don't think I did. It was a messed up time in my life, but that incident changed me forever. I am a very fearful person now and very overprotective of my kids. I don't want to change because I'd rather be like this than accidentally trust one of the millions of psychos out there. This happened last year around September. School had just started, and my only child was in kindergarten. She had only been in school a few days. We live in a rural area, and we only have one car. So in the mornings, we, my daughter, her dad, and I, get up to take her dad to work. Then my daughter and I come home and get her ready for school. Because we live on a rural, dead-end dirt road, we have to drive about half a mile down to the main road where her bus picks her up. Everything was fine that morning. I got her on the bus and headed home. I had the day off from work. I only work part-time, so days off in the middle of the week were normal for me. Anyway, I was doing some house cleaning and putting away some laundry. I went into my daughter's room and started hanging up some clothes in her closet. I had the TV on in the living room, watching it from her room. Then I heard what sounds like a soft, muffled cough. I froze. I had no idea what that was. I had no idea what to do. I was just standing there, almost paralyzed. My mind was racing. Maybe the cat is outside her window hacking up a hairball. Was I going crazy? Maybe it was the TV. It must have been the TV. Yeah, it's probably nothing. At this point, I am still standing in her room, holding a shirt in a hanger, not moving a muscle. I really have no idea what to do. I then think I should head next door and have my father-in-law check it out. I said out loud, "Forget it." I dropped the shirt and hanger and took off running to the house next door. Luckily, my in-laws live in the house right next door, only about a football field away, and my father-in-law is on disability, so he is almost always home. He is in his mid-60s and on an oxygen tank most of the time, so I don't really know what I thought he could do to help protect me, but I was really freaked out and didn't want to be alone. Plus, he was a hunter. Hunters have guns, so I am running faster than I have ever run before across our yards, and I bust into his back door screaming his name. He comes walking out to the kitchen looking annoyed that I just scared the crap out of him. I am on the verge of tears trying to tell him something is going on at my house, but I am talking so fast he can't figure out what I am saying. So he tried to calm me down, and I tell him I think someone might be in the house. He asks if I'm sure, and I say yes. I am begging him to come over and just check it out. He agrees. He grabs his gun and we get in his truck and drive over to my house. I wait in the truck with the doors locked while he goes inside. I am freaking out, looking all around me. He is in there for what seems like forever. He finally comes out and asks if I left a pack of Newports in her room right near her bed on the floor. Now I am a smoker, but I smoke Camels. I have never bought Newports in my life. I tell him no, those aren't mine. His eyes get huge and he gets a really panicky look on his face. He tells me to stay in the truck and call the cops. He hands me his phone and I call 911. The lady says we have to wait for the state troopers because we don't live in town. They seriously take like an hour to get out to us. I have already called my husband at work. He called his brother to come and pick him up. He doesn't work far from home, so it only takes about 20 minutes for them to show up. My father-in-law, my husband, and his brother are now walking all around in the woods that surround the houses. Nothing. There isn't anyone around besides us. After a while, the state trooper shows up and takes a look around. He finds nothing. He takes the pack of cigarettes, I guess as evidence, and takes my statement along with my father-in-law's statement. He tells us there isn't really anything he can do. I can't tell him what the guy or girl looks like because I didn't see anyone. There is nothing. Just a sound I heard and some smokes on the floor. Nothing is missing from the house. There isn't anyone there now, and it doesn't look like forced entry. Of course, there isn't going to be forced entry. We are in the middle of nowhere. Why would I lock my door when I leave to go somewhere? I feel like such an idiot, but nobody locks their doors around here. I don't even have a key for the door on my key ring. We just keep it on top of our outside fridge as a just in case. After the trooper leaves, my father-in-law gives my husband the gun to hold on to in case someone comes back. My husband and brother-in-law change all the locks on all the doors that day, and now we keep a key on our key rings and keep the doors locked at all times. We didn't take our daughter out of school that day. She was only 5, and we thought it would just stress her out. We did let the school know to be on the lookout for some weird activity, and we had a talk with our daughter about stranger danger and what to do if she sees someone in the house she doesn't know. I did have her sleep in our bed for a few weeks, but she seemed like she wanted to go back to her room because she's not a baby anymore. Well, that's it. Life moved on, and nothing has happened since. We never heard from the trooper or anything like that. We never had another incident like that again either. I have no idea what they were planning on doing. I don't know if they were after me or my daughter, or if they just wanted to rob us. I don't think I'll ever know. I still get paranoid from time to time, and I hate to be alone in the house. My husband got me a dog to keep me company and help protect us. I hope with time the fear will get less and less. Please always lock your doors, no matter how safe you think your neighborhood is. You never know who might just be passing through. This happened to me in 2016. I had recently moved back to my college town so I could rent an apartment with a friend after a long-term relationship ended. I was doing a lot of job hunting for pretty much anything, as I was pretty desperate for income and unsuccessful in finding work within my career field. I was using multiple job sites, but mostly Indeed because I liked their website features that help you track which jobs you've applied for and their status. There were, of course, some jobs that I applied for on their own websites, but I kept track. After a couple of weeks of searching, I got a call. I didn't recognize the number, and the area code wasn't familiar, but I picked up as it might be a job prospect. A woman was on the other end, and she said that she was calling to set up an interview as I had applied for their company. The company's name was not something that I remembered applying for. While on the phone with her, I quickly pulled up Indeed on my laptop and looked through all of the jobs I had applied for. None matched. I had no idea what this job was but didn't make this apparent on the phone, as I had been job searching for weeks and was still unemployed. I asked her for the address of the building and wrote it down. Looking back, I can't remember the name she gave me, but what I do remember was how pushy she was into scheduling the interview for later that evening. I agreed to the interview and thanked her, but as I hung up, I got a very bad feeling. Something didn't seem right, so I Googled the phone number, and it was not linked to a company. I Googled the address, and it was also not affiliated with a company. It was from way outside the distance of jobs that I was applying for, almost an hour away from where I lived. I pulled up Google Street View, and all I could see for the address she gave me were several smaller, rundown buildings with a highway exit in the distance. It looked desolate. I pictured myself driving there around dusk when she scheduled the interview, and I could physically feel this sensation of dread settling in me. I didn't want to go. I brought all of this up to my roommate at the time, and he said I might be overthinking it, but if I wasn't comfortable with it, not to go. I am so glad that I didn't go. The more time passes, the more I'm aware of just how shady it was. In hindsight, I wish that I'd gone to the police, but I didn't at the time because the year before I hadn't had much faith in them. I had tried to get a restraining order before for an ex who was telling me to kill myself and harassing me from burner numbers. Who knows what could have happened if I had gone? It's a scary thought.